The slam of a car door echoed through the studio parking lot as Madison Reynolds gathered her belongings, the cool morning air of Los Angeles carrying the scent of coffee and exhaust fumes. She checked her watch, 7:15 a.m., and quickened her pace. Being late to her first major press junket as the newly appointed film critic for the Daily Circuit would not make a good impression. The leather of her notebook crackled as she clutched it tighter, her fingers tracing the embossed letters of her name, a gift from her father when she landed this job. The studio's glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a lobby bustling with publicists, journalists, and industry insiders. Madison straightened her blazer, feeling her heart rate quicken. This wasn't just any press junket. This was Clint Eastwood's latest film, Crossroads at Dusk, a drama about an aging veteran confronting his past while mentoring a troubled youth. As she approached the check-in desk, a woman with a clipboard and a Bluetooth earpiece glanced up. Name and outlet? Madison Reynolds, The Daily Circuit. The woman scanned her list, her perfectly manicured nail trailing down the page. Reynolds, here you are. Take the elevator to the third floor. You're in Group B, room 305. Madison nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. She'd spent the previous night researching Eastwood's filmography, preparing questions that wouldn't sound derivative or uninspired. At 92 years old, the legendary director was still making films, though industry whispers suggested this might be his last. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We bring you compelling stories like this every week, and we'd love to know what city you're watching from. Drop it in the comments below. As the elevator doors closed, Madison caught her reflection in the polished metal. She looked younger than her 29 years, a fact that had made establishing credibility in this industry an uphill battle. Her editor's words echoed in her mind. Make a splash, Reynolds. Nobody reads safe reviews anymore. The elevator chimed, doors sliding open to reveal a corridor lined with publicists and handlers. Madison followed the signs to room 305, where a small group of journalists had already gathered, chatting quietly among themselves. She recognized a few faces, veterans who had been doing this for decades, their credentials hanging from lanyards like badges of honor. A tall man with silver-rimmed glasses approached, hand extended. Jacob Stern, Entertainment Weekly. You must be new. Madison shook his hand, noting his firm grip. Madison Reynolds, The Daily Circuit. Ah, the replacement for old Harrison. Jacob's smile didn't reach his eyes. Big shoes to fill. Harrison was respected. The implied "unlike you" hung in the air between them. Madison forced a smile, refusing to take the bait. Different shoes entirely. I'm wearing my own. Before Jacob could respond, a publicist entered, clipboard in hand. We're ready for you all. Please remember Mr. Eastwood has a tight schedule today, so one question per outlet. The room they entered was meticulously arranged, a comfortable armchair for Eastwood, surrounded by chairs for the journalists. The lighting was soft but effective, designed to flatter aging skin while still providing enough illumination for cameras. A hush fell over the room as Clint Eastwood entered, his tall frame slightly stooped but still commanding. The years had carved deep lines into his face, a roadmap of a life fully lived. He moved with deliberate precision, like a man accustomed to being watched. Madison felt a flutter of excitement. Regardless of his age, Eastwood was a living legend, a bridge to Hollywood's golden era. The publicist introduced him, though no introduction was necessary. Eastwood settled into the chair, his weathered hands resting on the armrests. Morning, folks. Let's not waste time. Questions began, predictable ones about his process, his inspirations for this film. Madison listened intently, observing how Eastwood's eyes remained sharp despite his age, how he considered each question carefully before answering in that distinctive, gravelly voice that had become his trademark. When it was Jacob Stern's turn, he leaned forward, pen poised over his notepad. Mr. Eastwood, there's been much speculation that this might be your final film. At 92, do you feel you've said everything you wanted to say as a director? The room temperature seemed to drop. Madison watched Eastwood's face, noticing the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible straightening of his spine. His silence lasted 2 heartbeats longer than comfortable. I'll be done when I have nothing left to say, he replied finally, his voice low but clear. Age is just a number on a calendar. Some days I feel it more than others. But when I'm behind the camera, that's when I feel most alive. Madison felt a spark of inspiration. When her turn came, she met Eastwood's gaze directly. Mr. Eastwood, your film tackles themes of legacy and perception. How do you respond to critics who suggest that directors of your generation should step aside for younger voices? The room went silent. Some journalists shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jacob Stern's eyebrows rose slightly, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Eastwood studied Madison for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then unexpectedly, he chuckled, a dry sound like autumn leaves rustling. That's a loaded question, young lady. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, suddenly more engaged than he'd been throughout the entire junket. You know, when I directed Unforgiven, people said I was too old to reinvent the Western. When I made Million Dollar Baby, they said I was too old to understand modern sports dramas. When I did Gran Torino, they said I was too old to connect with younger audiences. His fingers drummed once on the armrest. If I'd listened to those voices, some of my best work would never have existed. So to answer your question, I'll step aside when my stories stop resonating with audiences, not when my birthday cake gets too crowded with candles. A few journalists laughed appreciatively. Madison nodded, jotting down his response, feeling a small thrill at having elicited such a genuine answer. Later, back at her small desk in the Daily Circuit's open-plan office, Madison stared at her computer screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Most of the early reviews of Crossroads at Dusk had been respectful but tepid, praising Eastwood's commitment while suggesting that perhaps his best directorial days were behind him. Madison thought about Eastwood's eyes when he'd answered her question, the fire that had sparked in them. She began to type, the words flowing easily now. In an industry obsessed with youth and novelty, Clint Eastwood's Crossroads at Dusk feels like a masterclass in patient, deliberate storytelling. A direct challenge to our frenetic, short attention span cinema. At 92, Eastwood directs with the confidence of someone who has nothing to prove and everything to say. She paused, considering her next words carefully. Then her fingers resumed their dance across the keyboard. But perhaps it's time to acknowledge what many are reluctant to say. Clint Eastwood is too old to direct, too old to chase trends, too old to compromise his vision, too old to pander to what's expected. And in this age of formulaic filmmaking, that's exactly what makes his work so necessary. Marcus Chen, Madison's editor, leaned against her desk the next morning, coffee mug in hand, his expression a mixture of surprise and concern. Bold take, Reynolds. Madison looked up from her computer. Too bold. It's going to ruffle feathers. Eastwood has a loyal following, and that headline, too old to direct, why Clint Eastwood's age is his greatest strength. Marcus nodded. It's clickbait. People will read it as an attack before they even get to your actual point. That's the idea, Madison replied, feeling a flutter of nervousness but pushing through it. They'll come for the controversy, but stay for the analysis. Marcus took a sip of his coffee, considering. Your funeral, it goes live at noon. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By mid-afternoon, Madison's review had been shared thousands of times across social media platforms. Her inbox filled with messages, some supportive, others scathing. Film Twitter was ablaze with debate. Who does this novice critic think she is? Finally, someone said it. Eastwood's age is what makes his perspective unique. Shameful ageism masked as compliment. Brilliant analysis of why Eastwood remains relevant. Madison watched the numbers climb on the website's analytics dashboard, a mixture of excitement and dread settling in her stomach. She hadn't expected this level of response. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. Proud of you for taking a stand, kiddo. Just hope you're ready for what comes next. She was wondering what that meant when Marcus appeared at her desk again, his face serious. Conference room, now. The conference room's air felt thick with tension. Madison sat at the long table, Marcus beside her, while Edmund Rothwell, the publication's owner, paced by the windows. Explain to me, Rothwell said, his voice deceptively calm, why I'm getting calls from Eastwood's publicist, agent, and studio executives all on the same day. Madison swallowed. The review is generating traffic. Our site hasn't seen these numbers since. I'm not talking about traffic, Rothwell interrupted. I'm talking about relationships. This industry runs on relationships, Miss Reynolds. Relationships that took years to build and seconds to damage. With all due respect, sir, Madison said, surprised at the steadiness in her voice. I thought our job was honest criticism, not maintaining industry friendships. Rothwell stopped pacing, fixing her with a penetrating stare. Criticism requires credibility. What credibility do you have to declare Clint Eastwood, a man who's been making films since before you were born? Anything at all? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and pointed. Madison felt her cheeks grow warm, but she held Rothwell's gaze. The same credibility as any critic. The ability to analyze what works and what doesn't, regardless of who made it. She leaned forward slightly. And if you read beyond the headline, you'd see I'm actually championing his work, not dismissing it. Marcus cleared his throat. The numbers don't lie, Edmund. It's our most read piece this quarter. And the comments aren't all negative. It sparked genuine discussion about ageism in Hollywood. Rothwell sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Fine, but from now on, controversial headlines get approved by me first. Understood? Madison nodded, relief washing over her. As they left the conference room, Marcus murmured, You dodged a bullet there. But somehow Madison knew this wasn't over. The real test would come with Eastwood's response, if he deigned to give one. 3 days later, Madison was working late, the office nearly empty as evening settled over the city. Her desk phone rang, an unusual occurrence in an age of emails and text messages. Madison Reynolds speaking. Ms. Reynolds, the gravelly voice was unmistakable. Clint Eastwood here. Madison's hand tightened on the receiver, her heart suddenly pounding. Mr. Eastwood, I didn't expect to hear from you. I imagine not. A pause, then. I read your review. Madison closed her eyes, bracing herself. And I'd like to talk to you about it, in person, not over the phone. I'm doing a Q&A at the Directors Guild tomorrow night. Come backstage after. My assistant will put your name on the list. Before she could respond, the line went dead. Madison stared at the phone, a mixture of dread and anticipation washing over her. The Directors Guild Theater hummed with energy as industry insiders gathered for the Q&A. Madison sat in the back row, barely able to focus on the conversation happening on stage. Eastwood was animated, more engaged than she'd seen him at the press junket, discussing the challenges and joys of directing at his age. People often ask if this will be my last film, he said, responding to the moderator's question. I've learned never to say never. Each project might be the last. That's true for any director at any age. We're all just one bad review away from obscurity. A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Madison sank lower in her seat. But recently, Eastwood continued, I read something interesting. A young critic suggested I'm too old to direct, too old to follow trends, too old to compromise my vision. He paused and Madison felt her chest tighten. And you know what? She's absolutely right. After the Q&A, Madison showed her ID to the security guard backstage, her hands slightly trembling. She was directed to a small green room where Eastwood sat alone, a glass of water on the table beside him. Ms. Reynolds, he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Sit down. Madison complied, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Mr. Eastwood, I want to explain. He held up a hand. No need. I understood what you were saying. Provocative headline, thoughtful analysis, old trick in journalism. Madison blinked, surprised. You're not upset about being called too old? Eastwood's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Ms. Reynolds, I've been called much worse by much more established critics. The tension in Madison's shoulders eased slightly. Then why did you want to meet? Eastwood leaned back in his chair, studying her. Because you saw something others missed. You understood that my age isn't a liability. It's my perspective. And in an industry that worships youth and novelty, that perspective is increasingly rare. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Early numbers came in for Crossroads at dusk. Opening weekend exceeded projections by 40%. Word of mouth is strong. The studio is crediting the intergenerational appeal. Madison accepted the paper, scanning the figures with widening eyes. That's impressive. Know what else is impressive? The surge in young viewers. Demographic data shows an unexpected increase in the 18 to 25 bracket, unusual for my films. Eastwood fixed her with those penetrating blue eyes. Your review went viral in that age group. They came to see if the too old director still had something to say. Madison felt a slow smile spread across her face. So my controversial headline actually helped? It challenged people's expectations, made them curious. Eastwood stood, signaling the end of their conversation. That's what good criticism does. It doesn't just evaluate, it engages. Remember that, Ms. Reynolds. As Madison rose to leave, Eastwood added, I'm starting pre-production on a new film next month. Story about a young journalist who challenges an established system. Thought you might appreciate the irony. 1 year later, Madison sat in the darkened theater at the premiere of Eastwood's newest film, The Last Word, the story he'd mentioned in their meeting. Critics around her scribbled notes as the credits rolled, but Madison simply absorbed the moment. The lights came up and the audience erupted in applause as Eastwood made his way to the front for the post-screening discussion. At 93, he stood straight and proud, his eyes finding Madison's in the crowd. I want to thank someone who inadvertently inspired this film, he said, his voice carrying throughout the theater. A critic who reminded me why I still do this at my age. Because I'm too old to waste time on stories that don't matter, too old to care what people expect from me, too old to do anything but exactly what I believe in. As applause filled the room again, Madison felt her phone buzz with an incoming email. It was from her editor. Eastwood's new film tracking for his best opening in a decade. Your exclusive interview with him runs tomorrow. Front page. Madison smiled, remembering the journey that had brought her here. From a controversial headline to a mutual respect built on understanding. In challenging Eastwood, she had found her own voice as a critic. And in responding to that challenge, Eastwood had proven once again why age was just a number, why his voice remained vital in an industry that too often valued youth over wisdom. She thought of the words she'd written in her original review, now more true than ever. Too old to chase trends, too old to compromise his vision, too old to pander to what's expected. And in this age of formulaic filmmaking, that's exactly what makes his work so necessary. If you found value in this story about perseverance and challenging expectations, make sure to like and subscribe. And remember, true wisdom comes from unexpected places, sometimes even from those we're too quick to dismiss.